The black car came through the estate gates just after 4 in the afternoon, and before it even stopped moving, every servant standing near the front steps understood that something had changed forever. Duke Alaric Ravensmore stepped out first. Behind him, a woman in a red coat stepped out too, and she did not wait to be introduced. She looked at the house the way someone looks at a thing they already plan to own. Her name was Camille. Inside the house, Duchess Seraphina Ravensmore stood at the tall window of the drawing room, watching the car through the glass. She did not move. She did not call for anyone. She simply reached for the small silver bell on the table beside her and rang it once. A moment later, her assistant Margaret appeared at the door. "Bring a third cup," Seraphina said, "and the folder from my desk, the one with the red ribbon." Margaret hesitated. "Ma'am, are you certain you want to receive them together?" "I am certain of many things today," Seraphina said. "That happens to be one of the smaller ones." By the time Alaric walked into the drawing room, 3 cups were already sitting on the table, steam rising from each of them like nothing unusual was happening at all. He stopped in the doorway. Camille stopped half a step behind him, her hand still resting on his arm. "Seraphina," Alaric said, and his voice had the careful sound of a man walking across ice he was not sure would hold him. "Sit down," Seraphina said, "both of you. The tea is getting cold and I did not make it twice." Camille laughed, a short surprised sound, as if she had expected shouting, or tears, or the sight of her own bags being thrown from an upstairs window. Instead, there was porcelain and lemon cake, and a woman in pale blue who looked entirely too calm for a wife whose husband had just walked in with another woman on his arm after 18 months away. "You must be Camille," Seraphina said, pouring the tea without looking up. "Alaric mentioned you in one of his letters, briefly." "He mentioned me," Camille said, glancing at Alaric with something between pride and confusion. "He mentioned a woman," Seraphina corrected. "I filled in the rest myself." Alaric sat down slowly, watching his wife the way a man watches weather that has not yet decided whether it will be a storm. "I did not expect this kind of welcome," he said. "What kind did you expect?" "Screaming, perhaps, a thrown vase, something my mother would have approved of." "Your mother is no longer here to approve of anything," Seraphina said gently, and for a moment something crossed her face that was not calm at all, something old and tired that vanished as quickly as it came. "I decided a long time ago that I would not give you a performance, Alaric. I would give you the truth. The truth simply takes longer to arrive." Camille shifted in her seat, sensing something in the room she did not have the history to understand. She looked between husband and wife the way a person looks between 2 chess players who have been playing the same game for years, on a board she had only just sat down at. "I don't think I need to be here for this," Camille said carefully. "You do, actually," Seraphina said. "You are here because you are part of the story now, whether either of you intended that or not. It would be unkind of me to make you sit in another room while the walls decide your future without you." Alaric set his cup down harder than he meant to. "What is this, Seraphina? Say it plainly." "I intend to," she said, "but not today and not over tea and not in front of the staff who are currently pretending very hard not to listen at that door." She raised her voice slightly. "Edmund, you may go and tell the kitchen the Duke has arrived. Thank you." There was a soft, embarrassed shuffle of feet retreating down the hallway. Seraphina turned back to her husband. "Tomorrow morning, my study, 10 o'clock, come alone. And if I don't, then you will find out on your own time what happens to men who ignore deadlines," she said, and smiled the smallest, coldest smile Alaric had seen on her face in 6 years of marriage. "I would not recommend it." She stood, smoothed her dress, and walked toward the door, pausing only once to look back at Camille. "Enjoy the cake," she said. "It really is very good. I made it myself this morning before I knew exactly what kind of day I was having." Then she was gone, her footsteps fading up the staircase, leaving her husband and his mistress alone in a room full of expensive silence. Camille turned to Alaric, her earlier confidence cracked at the edges. "She's not what you told me." "I don't know what she is anymore," Alaric said quietly, staring at the closed door as if it might open again and explain everything. "I used to think I did." Upstairs, in her private study, Serafina locked the door behind her and leaned against it for exactly 3 seconds, long enough to let her hands shake once before she forced them still. Then she crossed to her desk, opened the bottom drawer, and looked down at a single folder tied with red ribbon. Inside it was a document that had taken her 18 months, 4 lawyers, 1 accountant she trusted with her life, and every ounce of courage she had left after her husband walked out the front door with barely a goodbye. Tomorrow she would place it in front of him. Tomorrow he would finally understand what she had built while he was gone, and why every quiet, patient thing she had done for the last year and a half now had exactly 1 signature left to collect before midnight of a deadline he did not even know existed. She looked at the clock on the wall. 18 hours. She had 18 hours to make sure the second most powerful man in this county understood that he had come home to a house he no longer fully owned and a wife he no longer fully knew. She untied the ribbon, just to look at the first page one more time, and whispered to the empty room the only thing she had allowed herself to say out loud in 18 months. Let him try to walk away from this one. Downstairs, Alaric was still staring at the door his wife had disappeared through, and for the first time since he had returned home with Camille on his arm, he felt something he had not expected to feel at all. He felt afraid. He did not sleep that night. He lay in the guest room, because Serafina had quietly informed Edmund that the master bedroom was, for the time being, hers alone, and Alaric had not argued. Arguing required footing, and he no longer felt he had any in this house. Camille had taken a room on the far side of the east wing, and twice during the night he heard her packing, her heels tapping against the wooden floor like a clock counting down something neither of them understood yet. At 5 in the morning, unable to lie still any longer, Alaric walked down to the study wing and found the door to his wife's private study slightly open, lamplight spilling into the corridor. He paused outside, listening. He heard the scratch of a pen, steady and unhurried, and the occasional rustle of paper. She was still awake, working. He almost knocked. Instead he turned and walked to the kitchen, where he found Nathaniel, the estate manager, already up, going through the morning ledgers with a cup of black coffee at his elbow. "You're up early, sir," Nathaniel said, not quite meeting his eyes. "Couldn't sleep," Alaric said. "Nathaniel, be honest with me. How has the estate been running while I was away?" Nathaniel's hand paused over the ledger. It was a small pause, barely noticeable, but Alaric had known this man for 15 years and he caught it instantly. "The estate has been running very well, sir," Nathaniel said carefully. "Better than well, actually. The Duchess has been thorough." "Thorough how?" "I think that's a conversation better had with her, sir, not with me." Alaric leaned against the counter, studying the older man's face. "You're frightened of her." "I respect her," Nathaniel corrected. "There's a difference, though I understand why you might not see it clearly this morning." At 9:30, Alaric dressed in the dark blue suit he usually reserved for board meetings, though no one had asked him to dress formally. He simply felt, somewhere in his chest, that whatever was coming deserved it. Camille found him in the hallway, on his way to the study. "You're going to see her," she said. It was not a question. "I have to." Alaric, her hand caught his sleeve. In daylight, without the confidence of the car ride and the red coat, she looked younger than he remembered and more uncertain. "What if she's planning to ruin you? People like her, wives like her, they don't sit quietly for 18 months without a reason." "She has always had reasons," Alaric said. "I just never used to have to ask what they were." He left her standing in the hallway and walked the rest of the way alone. The study door was closed when he arrived. He knocked once. "Come in," Serafina said. Her voice was steady, businesslike, nothing like the wife who used to hum while arranging flowers in this very room. He stepped inside and found her seated behind the desk, not at the small reading chair by the window where she usually took her morning coffee. Behind the desk, in the seat that had belonged to his late father and then to him for the entire length of their marriage. The red ribbon folder sat squarely in the center of the desk, closed. "Sit," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her, the chair a visitor would sit in. Not a husband, a visitor. He sat. "I want to start," Serafina said, "by telling you something you do not know. When you left 18 months ago, you told me it was business. A new venture, you said. An opportunity in the shipping trade that required your full attention abroad." "It was business," Alaric said. "It was," she agreed. "Just not the business you described. You put £400,000 of the family's capital into a shipping venture that failed within the first 4 months, and rather than tell me, or tell Nathaniel, or tell anyone at all, you kept traveling, kept spending, kept trying to win it back through worse and worse investments, until the family accounts were nearly a third of what they were the day you left." The room went very quiet. "How do you know that?" Alaric said, his voice low. "Because I am not a woman who waits by windows, Alaric. I hired an accountant the second month you were gone, when the household allowance stopped arriving on schedule. I found out everything. Every ship, every loss, every hotel bill in cities you told me you never visited." Alaric's jaw tightened. "And you said nothing for 18 months. What would saying something have accomplished? A letter across an ocean, asking my husband to come home and explain himself, while he was busy explaining himself to someone else instead." Her voice did not rise. "It did not need to. I decided that talking to you was no longer the most useful use of my time, so I did something else instead." She untied the red ribbon. "I began buying," she said. "Buying what?" "Shares in Ravensmore Shipping and Trade. Quietly, through a company that does not carry my name, over the course of a year and a half, using the fortune my own father left me, the fortune you always described so kindly as my little cushion." A small, humorless smile touched her mouth. "I have spent the last 18 months turning my little cushion into something considerably larger than the hole you dug in our family's finances." Alaric stared at her. "How much do you own?" Serafina opened the folder and turned the first page to face him. 52%, she said. "As of 9 o'clock this morning, when the final transfer cleared, I am, as of today, the controlling shareholder of your family's company, not you." The silence that followed had weight to it, the kind that presses against the ribs. "That's not possible," Alaric said finally. "The company charter requires the Duke's signature for any controlling transfer above 20%. "It does," Serafina said, "which is precisely why every purchase I made was structured beneath that threshold, through 6 different smaller acquisitions, each one legal, each one properly filed, each one small enough not to need your signature at all. I did not break a single rule, Alaric. I simply understood the rules better than you ever bothered to." He sat back in the chair, and for the first time since walking into the room, he looked less like a duke and more like a man realizing the ground beneath him had quietly become someone else's property while he was busy elsewhere. "Why are you telling me this now?" he said. "Why not simply let it happen? Let me find out from the lawyers or the newspapers or however you intended for me to find out." "Because there is one thing I cannot do without you," Serafina said. "One single thing. And that is exactly why you are sitting in that chair this morning instead of reading about your own ruin in tomorrow's paper." She pulled a single page from the folder and slid it across the desk toward him. "There is a bidder," she said. "A man named Oliver Whitfield, an old associate of your father's, who has spent the last 2 months quietly trying to purchase controlling interest in the company himself, believing the family was too weakened by your absence to resist. He does not know I already hold 52%. He believes there is still a controlling share available to be taken, and he has an offer ready to present to the full board at midnight tonight, when the company's annual shareholder window closes for the year. Midnight tonight, Alaric repeated. If his offer goes to the board unopposed, and if the remaining shareholders vote to accept it out of fear, believing the family is collapsing, he could still force a hostile restructuring, even against my majority, through a clause your own father wrote into the original charter 40 years ago. A clause that requires the Duke, specifically the Duke, by name and title, to formally certify the family's continued control before midnight on the deadline, or the protection lapses entirely. Alaric looked down at the page in front of him. It was not a divorce filing. It was not a request for money or an accusation or a threat. It was a single certification document, requiring one signature, his signature, confirming that the Duke of Ravensmore formally recognized and supported the current controlling ownership of Ravensmore Shipping and Trade. You need my signature, he said slowly, to protect a company that you now own more of than I do. Yes, even after everything. Especially after everything, Serafina said. Because this was never only your company, Alaric. It was your father's and his father's before him, and every family that has worked this estate for 3 generations depends on it continuing to exist tomorrow morning. I did not spend 18 months rebuilding what you nearly destroyed just to watch a stranger take it apart out of spite, and I certainly did not do it so I could hand it to you back gift-wrapped without asking anything of you at all. Alaric picked up the pen sitting beside the document, then set it down again. What do you want in exchange? He said. Because I know you, Serafina, even now, especially now, you would not hand me this without conditions. For the first time since he had walked into the room, something like approval flickered across her face. You always were faster than people gave you credit for, she said. Yes, there are conditions, but we do not have time to discuss all of them this morning, and I would rather you understand exactly what you are agreeing to before you agree to anything. She glanced at the clock on the wall. You have until midnight. I would suggest you spend the day learning what your signature is actually worth, instead of assuming you already know. She stood, gathering the folder, leaving only the single certification page on the desk in front of him. Read it carefully, she said. Every line, and Alaric one more thing. He looked up. Whatever you decide to do about Camille, Serafina said, her voice suddenly quieter, almost gentle, decide it because of what you actually want, not because of what happens in this room today. I will not have you confusing the two. I have too much respect left for myself to be anyone's consolation prize. She left him alone with the document, the pen, and the ticking clock on the study wall, and somewhere down the hallway, Camille was still waiting to hear what kind of man he had decided to be. Alaric spent the next hour alone in the study, reading the certification document line by line, the way a man reads instructions for a bridge he is about to walk across without knowing if it will hold his weight. The words themselves were simple, too simple, he thought, for something that could decide the fate of 3 generations of his family's work. 1 paragraph, 1 signature line, 1 date. He was still staring at it when Edmund knocked and informed him that a Mr. Harlow, the family solicitor, had arrived and was waiting in the east parlor, having been summoned earlier that morning by the Duchess herself. Alaric found the old lawyer standing by the fireplace, a leather case tucked under one arm, looking like a man who had been called in to referee a fight he had already guessed the outcome of. Your Grace, Harlow said, inclining his head, I imagine you have questions. I have several hundred, Alaric said, closing the parlor door behind him. Start with the most important one. Is what she told me true, all of it? Every word, Harlow said simply. I drafted the acquisition papers myself, across 6 separate filings, precisely as the Duchess described. I have represented this family for 30 years, Your Grace, and I will say to you plainly, because I believe you deserve plainness this morning, that I have never in that time watched anyone move as carefully, or as quickly, as your wife has moved in the last 18 months. Why didn't you tell me? Because you were not here to be told, Harlow said, not unkindly. And because, forgive me, Your Grace, but the instructions I received were from the person actually managing the family's affairs at the time. That was not you. Alaric sat down heavily in the armchair by the window. How bad is it? The company, truly. Harlow opened his case and withdrew a slim folder, setting it on the small table between them. Before the Duchess intervened, the company was 11 weeks from insolvency. 11 weeks, Your Grace, from the point at which the family name would have meant nothing to any bank in the county. She did not simply buy shares. She restructured 4 failing contracts, renegotiated 2 loans personally, using her own credit as collateral, and quietly kept 200 workers employed through a winter that would otherwise have seen this estate close its shipping offices for good. Alaric said nothing for a long moment, staring at the folder without opening it. And Whitfield, he said finally, what does he actually want? Mr. Whitfield, Harlow said, and something careful entered his voice, believes the family is weak, distracted, and vulnerable, precisely because that is the picture he has been fed. And I regret to tell you, Your Grace, that some of that picture was fed to him quite deliberately by someone very close to you. Alaric's head came up. What do you mean? Harlow hesitated, then reached into his case a second time and produced a single letter, its wax seal already broken. This arrived at my office 2 weeks ago, forwarded from a contact of mine in the city. I did not know, until I read it, how it was connected to your household. I believe you should read it yourself before I say anything further. Alaric took the letter. The handwriting was elegant, looping, unmistakably feminine. He recognized it before he reached the second line, because he had watched that same hand write him love letters for the better part of a year. It was Camille's handwriting. The letter was addressed to Oliver Whitfield. He read it twice, his face growing paler with each line. It described, in careful and businesslike detail, the exact state of the Duke's finances, his travel schedule, his growing dependency on Camille's company and reassurance, and a suggestion, delivered almost casually, that the timing of his return to the estate could be arranged to coincide with maximum public embarrassment for the family, should Mr. Whitfield find that useful for negotiating purposes. At the bottom, in the same elegant hand, was a single line that Alaric would not forget for the rest of his life. He trusts me more than he trusts his own wife. That should be worth something to you. Alaric set the letter down very carefully, as if it might shatter, or as if he might. She was never simply my companion, he said quietly. She was working for him. It appears that way, Your Grace. I cannot say for certain how long the arrangement existed, but the timing of the letter suggests it began well before your return home, possibly before you ever left this country in the first place. Alaric stood and walked to the window, looking out at the long green stretch of lawn where he had once, a lifetime ago, taught Seraphina to ride a horse she had been terrified of, laughing at her when she refused to let go of the saddle, promising her he would never let her fall. He had let a great many things fall since then, and none of them had been horses. Does Seraphina know? He asked, without turning around. I informed her of the letter's existence yesterday evening, Harlow said. I do not know what she has done with that information, or whether she intends to use it at all. That, I suspect, is a conversation you will need to have with her directly. Alaric turned back to face the old lawyer. Why would she not simply show this to me the moment I arrived? Why the tea, the calm, the folder with the ribbon? Why make me sit through an entire day of discovering things piece by piece, instead of simply telling me everything at once? Harlow considered this for a moment, choosing his words with the care of a man who had spent 30 years learning exactly how much truth a person could hold at one time. "I believe," he said slowly, "that your wife wanted you to arrive at the truth the same way she did, alone, slowly, without anyone softening the landing for you. She spent 18 months learning exactly how much you had let this family down, one document at a time, with no one there to comfort her while she did it. I think, Your Grace, she wanted you to understand what that felt like, even if only for a single day." Alaric closed his eyes. He found Camille an hour later, in the small sitting room off the east wing, arranging flowers she must have taken from the garden without asking, humming a tune he had once found charming and now found unbearable. She looked up when he entered, and something in his face must have told her everything, because the humming stopped immediately. "Alaric," she said carefully. "I read the letter," he said. He did not raise his voice. He found, standing there, that he did not have the energy left for anger, only for a kind of exhausted clarity. "The one you wrote to Oliver Whitfield." Camille's hand froze around the stem of a flower. For a moment she said nothing at all, and in that silence Alaric watched 18 months of careful performance simply fall away from her face, leaving something colder and more calculating underneath. "It's not what you think," she said finally, though her voice had already lost its usual warmth. "Don't," Alaric said. "Please. I have had exactly one honest day in 18 months, and I would like to keep it that way, even if it costs me the last thing I thought I had left." Camille set the flower down. When she spoke again, her voice had changed entirely, flattened into something businesslike, almost relieved to stop pretending. "Oliver approached me 2 years ago," she said. "Before you and I ever met, actually. He knew your family's finances were fragile, he knew you traveled often for business, and he thought a friendly companion, someone patient, someone who never asked difficult questions, might be useful in learning exactly how fragile things truly were. I did not expect to enjoy your company as much as I did. That part, at least, was not entirely false." "How comforting," Alaric said quietly. "You were an easy man to like," Camille said, and there was something almost like an apology in it, buried under everything else. "You simply were never a very difficult man to use." The words landed harder than he expected, harder than they should have, because some old, stubborn part of him had wanted, right up until this moment, for at least one piece of the last 2 years to have been real. "You should go," he said. "Today. Now. Before my wife decides what she wants to do with what she knows, because I promise you, whatever I might have wanted to say to you, it will be far kinder than whatever she is currently deciding." Camille studied him for a long moment, and then, to his surprise, she nodded, almost gracefully, as if some part of her had known this ending was coming since the moment the car pulled through the estate gates. "For what it's worth," she said, gathering her things, "I hope she makes you sign whatever she's planning to make you sign. I think, underneath everything, she's the only person in your life who ever actually wanted you to succeed instead of simply wanting something from you." She left without another word, and Alaric stood alone in the small sitting room, surrounded by flowers that were not his, in a house that, as of that morning, was no longer entirely his either, and felt, for the first time in longer than he could remember, something close to relief. He found Serafina in the garden an hour before sunset, standing near the old oak tree where they had married 6 years earlier, her arms crossed against the evening chill. "She's gone," Alaric said, coming to stand beside her. "Camille, I assume you already knew that." "I saw the car leave from my window," Serafina said, not looking at him. "I did not know until Harlow told me about the letter that she had been working for Whitfield the entire time. I want you to understand that, Alaric. Whatever else you believe about me today, I did not orchestrate her leaving. I simply gave you the information and let you decide what to do with it." "Why?" he asked. "Why let me have that day?" "The tea, the calm, all of it. You could have shown me the letter the moment I walked through the door. You could have humiliated me in front of her before I even had a chance to unpack. Serafina was quiet for a long moment, watching the last light fade over the hills beyond the estate. "Because I did not want you to sign that document tonight out of guilt," she said finally, "or shame or fear of losing everything at once. I wanted you to arrive at midnight already knowing the truth, all of it in your own time, so that when you finally do pick up that pen, you will be doing it because you understand exactly what this family is worth and exactly what it costs to protect it, not because I frightened you into it." Alaric looked at his wife properly then, for what felt like the first time in years, not as the calm and composed duchess who had poured 3 cups of tea the day before, but as a woman who had spent a year and a half building something enormous out of nothing but stubbornness and a father's inheritance, entirely alone, while the man who owed her honesty had been an ocean away, learning nothing at all. "There's still the matter of your conditions," he said quietly, "the ones you didn't have time to explain this morning." Serafina finally turned to look at him, and for the first time since he had arrived, he saw something underneath the calm business of the day, something raw and unguarded and tired. "There is still time before midnight," she said. "Come inside. It's cold out here, and I find I no longer have the patience to have this particular conversation standing under a tree." They sat across from each other in the study, the same room where the morning had begun, though it felt to Alaric like an entirely different house now, lit by lamplight instead of morning sun, the clock on the wall reading 7 minutes past 8. Less than 4 hours remained. "The conditions," Serafina said, folding her hands on the desk in front of her, "are not complicated, but I need you to understand that I am not offering them as punishment. I am offering them because I have learned over 18 months that trust is not something you simply announce and expect to have honored. It has to be built the same way I built this company back from nothing, one careful step at a time." "Go on," Alaric said. "First," she said, "you will step back from direct control of company operations for a period of 2 years. Not removed, not exiled, but you will act as an advisor to the board, not as the man making unilateral decisions about ships and contracts and investments he does not fully understand. Nathaniel will manage daily operations. I will oversee financial strategy as the majority shareholder, which is, incidentally, no longer a request but simply a fact." Alaric absorbed this without argument, though his jaw tightened slightly. "Second," she continued, "any expenditure above £5,000, personal or business, will require both our signatures for the next 2 years. Not because I don't trust you to be a grown man, Alaric, but because trust between us has to be rebuilt with evidence, not promises, and evidence takes the shape of small, boring, consistent things. Signatures, ledgers, showing up. And third," Alaric said quietly, "what happens to us, you and I?" For the first time all day, Serafina's composure wavered, just slightly, just at the edges. "That," she said, "is the one condition I cannot write into a document because I do not fully know the answer myself. I know that I do not want a divorce out of anger. I have had 18 months to be angry, and I find I am tired of it. But I also will not simply return to being the wife who waits by windows while her husband decides, every few years, whether this family is worth his attention. If we stay married, Alaric, it will be because you choose it every single day, not because it is convenient, or because I save the company, or because you have nowhere else left to go." Before Alaric could answer, there was a sharp knock at the study door, and Edmund entered looking flushed and slightly out of breath. "Your Grace," he said, addressing them both, "Mr. Oliver Whitfield has arrived. He says the matter cannot wait until morning. He is currently in the main hall, and I did try to tell him it was not a convenient hour, Your Grace, but he was rather insistent." Serafina and Alaric exchanged a look, and for the first time that day, something passed between them that felt less like negotiation and more like partnership. "Show him to the drawing room," Serafina said. "We'll be there in a moment." When Edmund left, she turned to Alaric. He must know something has changed. Perhaps Camille contacted him after she left. He would not come here in person unless he believed there was still something to gain. Then let's find out what he thinks he knows, Alaric said, standing, before he finds out what he doesn't. Oliver Whitfield was a tall man with silver hair and the kind of smile that had clearly opened many doors that should have stayed closed. He rose from the drawing-room chair when they entered, extending a hand that neither of them took. "Your Grace," he said smoothly, addressing Alaric first, as if by habit. "I confess I did not expect to find you home so soon, or looking quite so well given the state of things." "The state of things," Alaric repeated. "Please do go on. I find I'm curious what state you believe things to be in." Whitfield's smile flickered, just slightly, sensing something in the room he had not accounted for. "I understand there have been difficulties. Financial ones. I am here as a friend of your late father's, offering a fair and generous purchase of controlling shares in the company, which I believe would relieve your family of a great deal of pressure before matters grow worse." "How generous of you," Serafina said, stepping forward. "Though I find myself confused, Mr. Whitfield. Generous offers are typically made to the person who actually controls the shares in question." Whitfield turned to her, his smile tightening at the edges. "Your Grace, I mean no disrespect, but this is a matter of company ownership, not household matters. Perhaps it would be simpler if the Duke and I spoke privately." "I am the majority shareholder of Ravensmore Shipping and Trade," Serafina said, her voice calm and clear and utterly without doubt. 52%, acquired legally over the last 18 months, properly filed with the board's registrar as of this morning. I would be very happy to show you the paperwork, Mr. Whitfield, if you doubt me. I imagine Camille did not mention that particular detail when she reported back to you." The color drained slowly from Whitfield's face. "I don't know what you're referring to," he said, though the words came out less smoothly than everything before them. "I think you do," Alaric said, stepping forward now, and for the first time all day he felt something steady settle into his chest, something that felt oddly like the ground finally holding weight again. "I read the letter, Mr. Whitfield. The one Camille sent you, detailing my finances, my travel, my exact vulnerabilities, so that you might time an approach to the board for maximum advantage. I believe the letter is currently sitting in a solicitor's file, ready to be shared with the full board should your offer proceed any further tonight." Whitfield's jaw worked silently for a moment. "That letter proves nothing, a private correspondence taken out of context." "It proves enough," Serafina said, "combined with the acquisition filings, to make any board member currently sitting on the fence about your offer think very carefully about the character of the man asking for their trust. I imagine most reasonable men would rather do business with a family that rebuilt itself honestly than one that tried to buy its way in through a woman paid to gather secrets." There was a long, taut silence in the room, the kind that arrives right before something finally breaks. "You've been planning this," Whitfield said finally, looking between them with something like grudging, furious respect. "Both of you, all along." "No," Serafina said simply. "Only I have been planning this. My husband only found out the full truth about 11 hours ago and has spent the day since deciding whether he still wanted to fight for what remains of it. I would say, judging by the last 5 minutes, that he has decided." Alaric looked at his wife, and something passed between them, quick and wordless, the kind of understanding that 18 months and one very long day had somehow, against every reasonable expectation, managed to rebuild from almost nothing. "Mr. Whitfield," Alaric said, turning back to the older man, "I would suggest you withdraw your offer before the board meets at midnight, not because we are threatening you, though I imagine that letter alone would be threat enough for most men, but because I believe, if you present that offer tonight, you will find every director in that room asking themselves exactly the same question I have spent the last 11 hours asking myself. What kind of man builds success on someone else's ruin, instead of simply building something honestly?" Whitfield studied them both for a long moment, weighing something behind his carefully composed face. And then, without another word, he picked up his coat from the chair, inclined his head with the barest hint of civility, and walked out of the drawing room and out of the house, his footsteps echoing down the long hall until the front door closed behind him with a heavy, final sound. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "He'll try something else," Serafina said finally. "Men like that always do." "Let him," Alaric said. "We still have a document to sign before midnight, and I find I no longer intend to let anyone, including him, decide how tonight ends." Serafina looked at him for a long moment, something unreadable moving behind her eyes, and then, for the first time since he had walked through the estate gates with another woman on his arm, she allowed herself the smallest, most genuine smile of the entire day. "Then let's go finish what I started 18 months ago," she said, "before the clock decides for us." The study clock read 11 minutes to midnight when they finally sat down together at the desk, the certification document laid flat between them, the pen resting exactly where Serafina had left it that morning, as if it had been waiting all day for this exact moment. Nathaniel had joined them along with Harlow, who had remained at the estate through the evening in case his signature was needed as a witness. Even Margaret stood quietly near the door, sensing, the way household staff always seemed to sense these things, that something important was about to happen and that she would want to remember it. "Before you sign," Harlow said gently, "I should tell you both, the board's registrar confirmed 20 minutes ago that Mr. Whitfield's office formally withdrew his offer. There will be no vote at midnight, no hostile bid to contend with." Relief moved through the room like a held breath finally released, but Serafina did not lower her guard entirely, and neither, Alaric noticed, did she reach for the pen. "Then why do we still need to sign this at all?" Alaric asked, "if the danger has already passed?" "Because the danger passing tonight does not mean it could not return tomorrow or next year, in a different shape, with a different name," Serafina said. "The certification does not simply stop Whitfield. It formally and permanently protects the company's ownership structure going forward, regardless of who tries to challenge it later. It ensures that no matter what happens between us as husband and wife, the people who work for this family and depend on this family are never again 11 weeks from losing everything because of decisions made an ocean away." Alaric looked down at the document. One paragraph, one line for his signature, one line for hers beneath it, though her signature, he now understood, had already been secured through 6 quieter documents over 18 long months. He thought of the 200 workers Harlow had mentioned. He thought of Nathaniel, up before dawn every morning of the last year and a half, running a household that was not entirely his to run, out of loyalty to a family that had nearly cost him his livelihood through carelessness. He thought of his father and his father's father, and every name carved into the small stone chapel at the edge of the estate, men who had built something worth protecting long before he was born, and would have been ashamed, he understood now, of how close he had come to losing it over pride and poor judgment, and a woman who had never once asked him a difficult question, because she had never once actually cared about the answer. He thought, finally, of his wife, sitting across from him, who had spent a year and a half turning grief into strategy, turning betrayal into an inheritance strong enough to survive him, because she had refused to let his mistakes become the end of the story. He picked up the pen. "Serafina," he said before signing, "I want you to know, whatever else happens between us after tonight, that I understand exactly what you did. Not just tonight. All of it. I do not think I deserve the version of this family you managed to save, but I intend to spend a very long time trying to become someone who does." Serafina watched him for a moment, her expression unreadable, and then, quietly, she reached across the desk and placed her hand over his, not stopping him, simply steadying him the way she once had years ago, when she was the one afraid to let go of the saddle and he had promised her he would never let her fall. "Sign it," she said softly, "and then we'll see, one day at a time, whether promises like that still mean anything between us." Alaric signed his name at the bottom of the page, the ink dark and final against the white paper, and beside him, Serafina signed hers a moment later, her handwriting as steady and deliberate as it had been every single day of the 18 months she had spent building this exact moment without him. Harlow stepped forward and signed as witness, his own signature small and neat beneath theirs, and then, quietly, he folded the document, sealed it in its envelope, and slipped it into his leather case. "It's done," he said. "Filed and protected as of tonight. Ravensmore Shipping and Trade will remain in this family's hands for as long as the two of you choose to keep it there." The old clock on the study wall struck midnight, 12 slow chimes rolling through the quiet house, and no one in the room moved until the last one had faded completely. Nathaniel excused himself first, murmuring something about the morning ledgers. Though everyone in the room understood, he simply wanted to give husband and wife a moment of privacy after a day that had asked everything of both of them. Harlow followed shortly after, promising to return in the morning with the properly filed copies for their records. Margaret lingered only long enough to ask if the Duchess required anything further before retiring for the night, and when Serafina shook her head, she too slipped quietly from the room, closing the door behind her. Alone at last, Alaric and Serafina sat in the lamplight, the empty desk between them, the document gone now, carried off to wherever important papers go to become simply important facts instead of pending crises. "What happens now?" Alaric asked quietly. "Now," Serafina said, "you sleep. And tomorrow you learn how to be an advisor instead of a decision-maker, which I imagine will be considerably more difficult for you than tonight was." "That's not what I meant." She looked at him, and for the first time all day, the calm, composed mask she had worn since the moment his car pulled through the gates finally softened into something far more uncertain, far more human. "I don't know, Alaric," she admitted. "I built all of this without knowing what would happen at the end of it. I told myself some nights that it did not matter whether you came home changed or unchanged, as long as the company survived and the workers kept their positions, and this family's name meant something honest again. But I would be lying if I told you I did not hope, somewhere underneath all the paperwork, that the man who came home tonight might be someone I still wanted to build a life with." "And now that I have signed," Alaric said, "and Whitfield is gone and Camille is gone and the company is safe, what do you actually want?" Serafina was quiet for a long moment, studying him the way she had studied every document, every ledger, every quiet betrayal over the last 18 months, searching for the truth underneath the surface of things. "I want you to stay," she said finally, "not because you have nowhere else to go, and not because I saved something you nearly destroyed. I want you to stay because, somewhere in the middle of today, I watched you choose honesty over comfort more than once, and I had almost forgotten what that looked like on you." Alaric reached across the desk and took her hand, the same hand that had steadied his own only minutes before, and for the first time since he had walked through the front door with another woman on his arm, he felt something settle in his chest that was not fear, and was not guilt, but something quieter and more durable than either. "Then I'm staying," he said. "Not because of the company and not because of tonight, because somewhere in the middle of today, I watched my wife rebuild an entire family's future out of nothing but stubbornness and 18 months of quiet. Unglamorous work, and I understood, for the first time in years, exactly what kind of woman I had been careless enough to almost lose." Outside, the estate lay dark and silent under a clear winter sky, the same oak tree standing watch over the same garden where they had married 6 years before, and somewhere in the house, the servants who had spent the day whispering behind closed doors finally allowed themselves to breathe easy, sensing, the way households always sense these things eventually, that whatever storm had rolled through their home that day had finally, quietly passed. Serafina rose from the desk, and Alaric rose with her, and together they walked out of the study that had held the entire weight of the day, leaving the empty desk and the dying lamp behind them, ready, at last, to begin the far harder work of becoming, one ordinary day at a time, the people they had almost stopped believing they could be.